Let's see how it goes. Interesting. That works. Okay. So first of all, so earlier this week, Graham Hutton, who was the co-chair of FUNARCH last year, he said, "How was working with Perdita?" And I said, "It was a dream." And he said, "That's what I thought." So thank you, Perdita, first of all.
Michael didn't work.
No, that is not true. And I have numerous, specifically one piece of work. So there's the program committee, of course, that does the reviews. I want to point out that they didn't just do the reviews, but we always consider, for papers that are coming in, we always consider doing shepherding. And that happened in a number of cases. I think that's generally a good idea, especially for workshops where maybe you have some first-time authors. So thank you to the program committee. I think none of them is here in this room anyway. And I think only Richard is actually, oh, well, Martin is somewhere around here. So if you see them, you might thank them. And Ilya's here, yeah. He's very busy now, though, preparing next year's ICFP. So, but if you were here last year, then you probably noticed, so the program is not quite as packed as it was then, and the room is also not quite as packed as it was then. So that raises some obvious, and this is only the second time around, so that raises a couple of questions, right? Is it worthwhile doing this again? Do we have the right format for doing this? I mean, this is something that Graham and I just made up last year. And we didn't know how well it was going to work or how suitable it was going to be. One thing, a couple of people have said, well, I'll get to that. Is it the right time in the sense of, is it the right day within the ICFP sort of days that we have? And maybe we can briefly talk, so if we answer the first question with a yes, then we can talk about next year and onwards a little bit. So. Is this a worthwhile thing to do? So, well, you're here in this room, so, so maybe people not in this room would say no, but obviously I feel it's worthwhile, but I mean, you're kind of nodding, but why is it worthwhile? What do you think? I mean, I can say why I think it's worthwhile, but why do you think it's worthwhile?
Well, to me, this is the track that goes a bit more into the practical matters of applying functional programming, to do actual, not useful work, but actual real stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's worth talking about that.
Okay. Well, ICFP has definitely moved away from that, so arguably there's a little gap there. But I mean, of course, quite a few of the other workshops that are running right now also talk about a little bit more specific practicalities. It's really an honest question. Why is it worthwhile to you? Right?
I think I agree with that, and there's also this. I mean, the experience reports. So there was one experience report ICFP, but then that's a big audience, right? So I mean, I think it's also nice to have an opportunity for the sort of more bigger scale or commercial things, but in a smaller environment than the full ICFP.
Yeah. Okay. Any other takes? So, I mean, I gave a talk last year on why I thought it was worthwhile, so I'm just going to repeat sort of my central point, which was that there's a huge communication gap between sort of the larger software architecture community and us, right? Not just a communication gap, there's just lots of stuff that they know that we don't, and the other way around. So you just pointed out that maybe the OMG would have benefited from importing more sort of semantics or functional programming. And I can, well, Marco talked about, the object-oriented community has come out with all this stuff in domain-driven design, and some of that is useful to us. Maybe all of that is useful to us. And this workshop was definitely not designed to be the solution to that. It was supposed to be one building block, right? That in the grand puzzle that we're trying to fill, would like play, you know, what would be one part. So if we think that, let me go, do we have the right format for this? I mean, we made a couple choices, right? In that, I mean, one definitely relevant choice was that there's a publication associated with the papers at the workshop, right? And we could have chosen not to do that, right? Either by not having like formal papers or not having the papers be a formal ACM publication, instead doing some kind of tech report, because we felt it was important to, if we're going to communicate, given there's, you know, X people here and maybe 4 people watching the live stream and maybe a couple people then watching the video afterwards, but that it's important to preserve the publication, right? So that other people beyond this room could look at it. But presumably, so that means though that the format is effectively like a small conference, right, still, right? So it's, you know, somebody, you know, I used to run farm, and then, you know, one year somebody came in and said, we're putting the work back in workshop, right? And then actually had the audience involved in a little project, assembling a little hardware piece and doing a little programming on that, right? So in that sense, it's not a workshop, right? So is there, I mean, in principle, the call allows for other kinds of submissions, right? You could propose a panel of some sort or some whatever, right? There's an open category even, but nobody's done that so far. Yeah.
So personally, I think the format, what the format provides is good, and I personally like having that kind of that range of options up to a full research paper.
Mm.
I think, you know, one way, you know, would be to lower the barrier of entry by offering. I mean, I'm not sure actually if this is offered. So, can you propose an extended abstract with, you know, can you write one page and send an extended abstract, or, you know, sometimes people have these with a later deadline or lightning.
I'll have something to say about the deadline in a moment. Yeah.
So a lighter thing, because, you know, partly with a workshop, you know, you also want to have good talks, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, unfortunately the deadline, as soon as you do a publication, has 2 bookends. And one of them is that it needs to be after the ICFP deadline, that it needs to be after ICFP notification, because in principle, I mean, nobody submits architecture or practical programming papers to ICFP anymore, apparently, but things were kind of predicated on that theory. But the idea is that people would be able to submit their rejected paper from ICFP, right? And on the other hand, the stuff at least that go into the publication, they go into a publication process, and you know what that was like, right? You communicate with the publication company, you know, you gotta, whatever, get the right LaTeX incantations in place, and you gotta go typically a few, I don't know if you've gone, but most people I've talked to have gone a few rounds with them. And the deadline that they originally proposed was 3 weeks earlier than the one it was, and this really threw me back to the old days in ICFP when things were on paper, right? And so, strangely enough, I was workshop chair with Graham, right? And Graham, who's always meticulously prepared, like had this process document that said, they will propose an unrealistic deadline for publication. You need to push back, and then it will be pushed back. And this was 15 years ago, so so it felt exactly the same way around.
So I have a naive question. So you said that the submission date has to be no earlier than the ICFP rejection, and I get the reasoning, but you also said nobody submits this kind of
Yeah.
paper to ICFP.
So yeah, maybe that assumption is wrong.
Or could we just decide, you know, we're not competing with ICFP for papers, we'll have our deadline earlier and have more time for
Yeah.
revisions and discussion?
I mean, so I have to say that we missed the original deadline, and you know, we wrote an experience report, so I think we started writing after the first deadline in
Yeah.
March. So I think, and also the ICFP, and we're, you know, so I think that's so entrenched in people's minds that the workshop deadlines are a bit later. I mean, it's catching the rejected papers but just as part of the bigger event.
Yeah. I mean, so one question is if you, I mean, the thing is, right, a lot of the potential submissions or a lot of the actual submissions also are coming from industry, right? And so, of course, as an academic, right, specifically as an academic who's here, right, you have all this culture and education in writing papers, which you might not have when you are in industry, right? Are we providing the right, I mean, we do shepherding, which is something that happens basically after acceptance or conditional acceptance, right? I mean, a couple of authors are here, did you feel that you got the right kind of support and the right amount of support? Okay. Yeah, well, you had, okay.
I think it also depends, I mean, it's also the company perspective, right? So whether people value, writing a paper, participation,
Yeah.
and stuff. So it's, I think, in my experience, we are kind of, we all have an academic background, so this is maybe normal. But yeah, it's interesting that there are all the sponsors tables outside, and some of them will have people from those companies who contributed in different ways. Some of them will have probably papers at conferences or experience reports, and the interaction that you need to utilise that connection.
But my thinking is it would be great to have more experience reports and papers,
Yeah.
and that really is the core
Yeah.
of the thing
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
One thing I wonder is, so you said that we did shepherding, we did, but we didn't advertise that we were going to do shepherding.
Okay.
Are there people out
Really?
there who might write papers if they knew that shepherding was going to be available? I mean, is there a community of people who don't submit papers because they're not very familiar with doing it and they think they don't know how to do it? Or are
Good
actually all
point.
the people who
Good
might
point.
do it,
Okay.
ex-academics who do it, that's how they do it?
And this goes in a few other, good point. Apparently we forgot to advertise, so.
I mean, I don't know whether it would make a difference or not.
No, I just checked, so we forgot. So this is an honest admission here.
I mean, this is going to be potentially very idiosyncratic. And as I said, I'm economist,
Yeah.
what I'm looking for when I come here is very different, I guess, from the average person. But I think the few computer science computer science conference or workshops that I've been to, what was most useful for me was, usually things like experience reports, but especially when it was quite applied in a way where I could tell, could I use that or not? That's kind of my main goal when I go to these things. So the closer to apply that is, the more helpful. I was just wondering whether something like a panel discussion where one sort of sets a problem that is probably quite common across a few things and has various people say how they have addressed it in a specific setting might be more interesting than, might have a higher density of what I've learned for the time spent as an audience member than seeing one person's approach to it. Like taking our continuations thing today, if that's really fitting you, then great. Otherwise, you sit there feeling, well, yeah, okay, but I would have preferred seeing 2 or 3 other approaches to stateful things on the web or something like that.
I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that there's a very specific ecosystem, right, that we're in, right, in terms of computer science conference, programming language conference, right, and things are definitely different in other communities, and I think we tend to forget. I think a lot of people here tend to take the current format that we have as given, right? And they forget really, they literally forget that there's a work-in workshop. And there's this natural, right, in computer science, things are kind of skewed in that the main publication venue is the conferences, so the conferences really are like journals. This means that everything else beneath it kind of moves up one step. But unfortunately, there's nothing below workshop, right, that would then take that place. So that sounds like a good idea.
There are different formats, right? So some places they have pre-proceedings or they only have abstracts like types, for example, and then they have something afterwards. So they're different.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing that we asked a bunch of people, Graham and I, when we started out, right? And it seemed that there were at least a few people for whom publication would be a substantial incentive, right, to send something in, right? So, for you?
I don't raise my hand because for me,
Yeah.
in econ, it takes more like 3 or 4 years to publish something, but
Yeah.
at the same time, they count all publications equally. So
Okay.
for me, this was a nice arbitrage opportunity.
Okay, yeah, well, very good, very good.
It was genuinely a benefit.
Yeah, so, okay,
From that
that's
perspective.
good to know.
But sometimes in the future, I might be like, I don't need more papers right now. I actually rather have feedback on them. So just
Filled your quota for this year. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, we can collect ideas here. This is now a very concrete question. I kind of only noticed yesterday that today is really crowded, right, as far as other workshops are concerned. If you're here, you might not have noticed, but I mean, you know, for the racket talk, this room was full, and all these people are now in other workshops, right? Most of them anyway. So, and there's Haskell going on, there's the ML workshop going on, there's a new one called, I forget, something proper. There is the mini Canron workshop going on. There's Tidy going on, right? And definitely at sort of the, at some of these other venues, I mean, they definitely have overlapping interests, right? I mean, whatever, all the Jane Street people are all about OCaml, so they tend to, well, OCaml is tomorrow, but a lot of them still hang out at the ML workshop today, I think. So if you can imagine for yourself right now when you're in this room, right, would things be different? I mean, there's a couple of alternatives. The obvious alternatives are the other workshop days, right? And so there was one before the conference, which was on Monday, right? And that one had, well, let's check the program, right? Maybe turn off dark mode. So this had farm, right? So the workshop on art, they had the Erlang workshop. It had PLMW, and it had HOPE, higher order programming and effects. So if FUNARCH had happened on that day, would you be here today? Honest question,
So
right?
I think
Just
you would have less competition.
yeah.
But then, you know, some people have arrived just for the Haskell Symposium. They arrived today
Yeah.
or last night, so you wouldn't get those extra people popping in and out.
Yeah.
And it would also, if you also want, I mean, Haskell Symposium is obviously the biggest
Mm-hmm.
extra, you know, I'm sure it must be the second biggest, right, so event. So then it makes it a very long week. So it's a bit like talking about parallel
Yeah.
tracks or not.
Well,
it's very different.
yeah, well, I mean, the thing with the overlap is a two-edged sword because, I mean, the idea is then to get some people who are now at the Haskell Symposium into FUNARCH, right? But these people would still like to go to the Haskell Symposium, and so that means that they then have to suffer through 3 days of mechanized semantics before that happens.
It's difficult. And last year,
Yeah.
I did notice that you got, you know, there were people who probably were, you know, heavily involved in the Haskell
Yeah.
Symposium who dropped into FUNARCH, and I noticed that the audience went up and down quite a lot
Yeah.
during the day.
Yeah. So tomorrow would be, so what's going on tomorrow, that would be an alternative, right? So there's the Scheme workshop, there is the OCaml workshop, and there's the second day of the Haskell Symposium, right? Would that be better, we think? So let me float another idea that I'm never going to get past the ICFP steering committee, but to do it parallel to the last day of ICFP.
I think you're right. You won't get past it. Yeah.
I mean, we did get something like that past the steering committee or past the program committee. My company runs a developer conference every year, Bob, And we did a special edition when ICFP was in Berlin in 2019, right? And I was able to convince Derek Dreyer to run it concurrent. I mean, Bob is not quite the same thing, but vaguely similar in sort of the kind of audience that might be interested. And I was able to convince Derek Dreyer to do it, I think, during the last day of ICFP. And I think that worked out really well. In particular, maybe slightly to ICFP's disadvantage, because Bob was packed always, right? And so there was probably some people might have hung out at ICFP instead, or, so it's an idea to, so I mean, you know, I mean, the worst they can do is turn me down, right? Should I ask them for that for next year, if we should do that?
Why did it work for Bob?
Huh?
Why do you think it worked for Bob?
I think it worked for Bob because, well, I'm going to vastly oversimplify, but Bob is a very practical conference, right? And we asked even the speakers that came over from ICFP to give sort of practically oriented talks. And ICFP has become just a much more theoretical conference in the last 10 years, I think, than it used to be. And so I think your interest is going, so the chance is higher that your interest is in one of these areas, but not in both, right? And that, right.
I mean, to me, that's a kind of different kind of thing. That's a bit like ICP co-located with Splash. You get that synergy of two communities coming together, and it's kind of a one-off thing. I think it's a little bit different to have the interaction with the satellite workshop and the
I mean, to me, it always seems strange that ICFP should be exempt from the conflicts that you have for the workshops, right?
Really?
Huh?
I thought that was normal.
Huh?
Yeah.
No, this has been, this,
Stats, for example, has these, so that has several conferences, and they're kind of during the week, and then the workshops are at the weekends. I thought it's pretty common, but I don't know. I should stop coming up with it.
I mean, the basic question, right, is ICFP really, or is any given day of ICFP really of such general interest that all the 400 people here have to absolutely hear all the talks, right? So I might ask Ilya if there's a chance to do it on the last day of that. So that's, or somebody might ask, because. So if we're going to do this again, there's a couple of issues, right? So each workshop obviously needs chairs, or at least one chair, and needs a program committee. It needs most importantly, it needs, well, let me correct that and just say submissions. Also, if we're going to perpetuate the workshop, then workshops generally have a little bit of governance to ensure that. And there's might be a little steering committee and and some charter or something like that written up. So it's been my great pleasure to be the chair last year and this year. There's this problem in that I'd not just like to have this workshop, I'd also like to submit this workshop to this workshop. And as a chair, I can't do that. So,
Is that ACM?
yeah, that's insurmountable ICM. So I should note that if you're on the program committee, it's perfectly fine to submit, but if you're the chair, you can't, right? And so I would very much appreciate if somebody else chaired it. I mean, that would have, it would get my support definitely. Obviously, there would have to be some support also to sort of carry over the institutional knowledge. So you don't have to say yes right here, but if you could conceivably see yourself chairing next year's workshop, I would appreciate a note, or if you know somebody that you might ask. This is also the same kind of question goes for the program committee. I think we're going to do, or somebody's going to do, I always say we, but as sort of reflex, but I really shouldn't. There's going to be a slightly wider search for that, so I don't think that's a significant issue. My personal conclusion from this workshop is we so we did, so we got less submissions than we did last year. We also did less soliciting of papers than we did last year. So, and maybe those things go together, maybe they don't, I don't know. But my personal conclusion is that if we're going to continue doing this, or at least for next year, we should probably try much harder to talk to people personally. My feeling is, or not just my feeling, my impression is that there's a lot of people who have something in store, right? Who have experience writing larger scale functional programs, who are in a good position to frame some earlier work that they've done in architectural terms. I talk to a lot of people here who say, yeah, I got something, right? All I need to do, you know, and we have concrete ideas of what they might do. All that needs to happen is that they need to be persuaded to write them up, right? So that would be, even if it's not the usual mode, we had a brief discussion of that for a workshop, but I think that's okay. I don't know if anybody sees a problem with that. And that, of course, that might impact what you might otherwise see as sort of an impartial and fair process, which I kind of don't subscribe to that view. But is there anything worth adding to that? I mean, I kind of said what my view is. So the third thing is then to establish some kind of governance. And so there's the third, so there's the chairs, there's the PC, well, a fourth thing, obviously, a fourth group of people. Well, as I said, the usual thing, and I think the thing that we're going to try and do now after this workshop is establish a little steering committee. The main job is to ensure that next year's workshop happens, even if they don't do the work, right? And have a few rules in place and maybe, you know, carry over, you know, a few notes on how that's done. Again, so this really should not be a whole lot of work, right? It's like 3 meetings a year or something like that. And maybe write a few emails to people. So if you can see yourself doing that, I would also appreciate that, Ping. So I'm going to refrain from doing that now, but I see Stefan nodding. So we'll see if I can convince him. Anything else we should discuss about what we're doing? Okay. Then that concludes our business. Let me put in a little bit of advertising because probably it needs some advertising because I don't know if you were here at the beginning of the week, you saw that there were tutorials, but they weren't scheduled yet. They have been scheduled now. So, so there's a tutorial tomorrow morning, which might also be interesting because I'm also, we can certainly also discuss the industrial perspective of teaching functional programming. So it's not just if you are like a lecturer and have students, but also if you're interested in how to teach functional programming to your organization, then I will have a few things to say, or we can just have, we can kind of pool our knowledge on this. Lots of other people have experience with this, so but I certainly can say something on that. So if you're interested in that, I would love for you to be there. Come tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So I guess starting time changes again tomorrow morning. That concludes our business. Thank you for being here. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, Marco, for doing your talks, and hope to see you next year and even more people.
Yeah,